If modern medicine didn't exist, would you be dead right now? If yes, from what? I was born with birth asphyxia. I was delivered via C-section. I had a staph infection when I was very little, and there was a time where I literally became psychotic. So it's pretty safe to say that without modern medicine I would be in the soil. That's a heavy story. Your journey highlights how vital modern medicine is. Your resilience is clear, going through so much from the start. It's interesting to think about how different things might have been without those medical advances. Just goes to show how important they are for so many lives. The answer to this question is yes for a lot of people who don't realize it. You being born in a stable place where people know what to look for if you are in distress is the result of thousands of years of medical knowledge being passed to the people helping with your birth. It's true, a lot of people take it for granted. I remember a friend who had a rough start but was lucky enough to be born in a hospital with skilled staff. Their family always talked about how different life could have been if they were born somewhere else. It just shows how much context matters in our lives. Some things aren't as obvious until you really think about them. 2 heart attacks. Left anterior descending, aka the widowmaker, 2 angioplasties, first through the femoral, second through my wrist. Back home 2 days later, $187,000 and $125,000 in medical bills. These happened about 3 years apart, by the way, not together. That's a rough experience. Heart issues are serious and can really take a toll. Dealing with high medical bills on top of the health risks adds more stress. I can't imagine going through 2 big health scares and having to worry about all that extra stuff after. Glad to hear you're okay now, I guess. It's one of those wake-up calls that really makes you think. Yes. I stayed stuck in the birth canal for 12 hours with no progress before the doctor performed the C-section that resulted in a very squished little me with a flat forehead that did thankfully even back out over about a week's time. That's an interesting start to life. Being stuck like that must have been tough, even if you don't remember it. It's kind of wild how the body can bounce back from something like that, though. Glad to hear you ended up okay. A flat forehead is just a part of the story, I guess. Life has a funny way of starting sometimes. I would have died at around the age of 5 from blood poisoning due to a catastrophic intestinal hernia, most likely. I don't actually remember it, but apparently I'm very resistant to the anesthetic they used to put me under for the surgery. Fun times. That's quite a serious situation to be in as a kid. It's interesting how some people have unusual reactions to anesthesia. I guess it didn't stop you from growing up, though. Sounds like it's a story you can look back on without too much drama. Life's twists can be pretty unexpected. Glad that everything turned out fine in the end. About 10 times over by now. Starting with dying at birth because of the cesarean my mother wouldn't have received. But to be fair, I'm pretty sure my dad would have died from polio when he was a kid. He spent many years in hospital because of that, and I never would have been conceived to begin with. It's interesting how life can hinge on such small moments. The whole idea of being here because of a series of events that could have gone differently is pretty wild. It's like a chain reaction where each link matters. If your mom hadn't had that cesarean, or if your dad hadn't fought through polio, things would be completely different. Makes you think about all those little decisions that shape everything. Hemoglobin level of 4.6 for who knows how long? Months I couldn't breathe, but didn't know why. Just needed some transfusions and some for iron, and now I am as good as new. 7 days in the hospital though. That sounds rough. It's crazy how you can feel off for so long and not really know what's happening. Good thing you got the transfusions and iron in time. 7 days in the hospital's a decent amount, but at least you're feeling better now. It must be a relief to finally breathe easily again. Hope you're taking it easy and recovering well. I don't know about death, but I would definitely have a terrible quality of life. I'd be exhausted and disoriented all the time due to 5 concussions and be dealing with mental health problems without any medication. It's tough when injuries linger like that. It's like being stuck in a fog. You try to live normally, but you can't shake the tiredness or disorientation. That can weigh heavily on your mind too. It's important to find support and talk to someone who understands. Quality of life really matters. Sometimes just getting through the day is a challenge, but reaching out can help make it a bit easier. CDH, congenital diaphragmatic hernia. I was born with it, but it wasn't discovered until I was 6 days old. This was in the 80s before they could detect it or correct it in utero. At nearly a week old, I stopped breathing on my own and turned blue. I was rushed to emergency where they found the issue. There was a hole in my diaphragm, and my intestines had protruded up into my chest, wrapping around my lungs and pushing my heart to the side. One of my lungs was collapsed completely, the other was partially collapsed. I was life-flighted to Atlanta to have an emergency surgery. The surgeon said that normally babies die from this condition, or they have a low chance to survive the surgery, but because I had fought so hard for a week and had such a will to live, he'd give me a 50% chance of surviving. I died on the table, but was revived and survived in NICU for a month, with wires hooked to my tiny body. I lived, when I should have died because of modern medicine, even if it was the old-school approach. I have a scar that reaches across my belly that proves that I am meant to be here. That's a tough start to life. It's wild to think about the challenges faced so early on. Your journey through that surgery and recovery sounds intense. Almost dying and then coming back is something not everyone can say they've experienced. That scar is more than just a mark, it's a reminder of resilience and the role of medical advances. It's cool to hear how far you've come since then. I have had 2 over the past decade or so. I don't get to talk or hear about others' experiences much. Do you mind? How often do you have these? Does it feel the same to you each time? Nausea and headaches and fog? Can you tell when it's going to happen? Are you conscious at all when it happens, or do you go away once it starts? Does medication help? Please don't feel you have to respond to all of these questions. I'm just curious to hear anything you feel like talking about. I've had my share of those experiences too. They usually come out of nowhere. The nausea and headaches are the worst part. Sometimes I can sense something's off before it hits. When it starts, it's like everything fades away. Medication doesn't always help, but I try to manage it. It can be isolating not talking about these things, so I get your curiosity. Everyone's journey is a bit different. Same. I was a teenage girl, so they just told me it must be your period, and got sent home. Almost died a day later when it burst open. I had an infection that left me unable to move any part of my body for a week. That's rough. It's wild how often stuff like that gets brushed off. You think people would take it more seriously. Having an infection like that must have been really scary, especially being stuck like that. Hope you're doing better now. Me too. Was inflamed while I was in college, went to the hospital and was told I have to get surgery. While waiting it burst. My appendix was located in a weird spot in my body and they had to go through my stomach. I was very weak after, had to spend about 9 days in the hospital learning how to walk and move again. Spent about 60 to 80 days at home laying down as my stomach had to be dressed and cleaned every day and heal up from where they split it. Took me about 2 weeks to get the strength to get off the couch in the living room and move upstairs to my bedroom. All in all, it took months to recover fully, and even then I would up with a huge hernia in my stomach. I would have been cooked without modern medicine. That sounds rough. I can't imagine dealing with that kind of pain and recovery. Having to learn how to walk again must have been frustrating. It's wild how something like that can change your everyday life for months. Dealing with a hernia on top of everything just adds to the ordeal. It's a good reminder of how important medical care is. Glad you were able to get through it. If it wasn't for constant pneumonia as a kid, I would have said this. I was 18. Went to see a nurse. I was having unbearable pain. Felt like every pebble or bump on the drive there was someone stabbing me. I could barely walk. She sent me home. Said I was having just an upset stomach. I knew something wasn't right, so I rushed to the ER and they did surgery immediately. Surgeon said if I came in 30 minutes later, my appendix would have exploded in me. He said when he removed it, it was like an oozing rock. EW. That's a wild story. It's crazy how sometimes medical professionals can miss things. Glad you trusted your instincts and went to the ER. An oozing rock sounds pretty intense. Just goes to show that if something feels off, it's worth getting a second opinion. I guess a close call like that can really make you appreciate your health more. Hope you're doing better now. Same. As a 14-year-old, I woke up in Tokyo in June 1995 feeling ill with my mom, but I had to fly back to the USA to spend the summer with my dad. It hurt to pee on the flight over the Pacific. I pretended to be okay going through customs in Portland, Oregon to avoid quarantine. I had the worst flight ever on a turboprop through a thunderstorm from Atlanta to Jackson, Mississippi. I woke up at 4 a.m. and begged my dad to check the encyclopedia for appendicitis so he would take me to the ER. I went into emergency surgery with sepsis 30 minutes later. Then, I spent a week in the hospital and a month with a cauterized open wound to aerate the area. I certainly would have died without surgery and antibiotics. Thank God for modern medicine. That sounds really rough. I had a similar experience when I was younger. I was on a trip and started feeling sick. I didn't want to ruin the fun, so I kept pushing through. Finally, I had to go to the hospital. Turns out, I needed surgery too. It's wild how quickly things can turn. Modern medicine really does save lives, and I'm grateful for it every day. Due to an earlier car accident I was in, I had an inflated bowel. Nothing to do with appendicitis, but as they were in there, they removed it as well. I thought it was because of the roast duck I ate the night before at a Chinese restaurant, but no. Certainly would have led me to be in an early grave if it wasn't for modern medicine. That's a tough situation. It's wild how something like a car accident can lead to unexpected medical issues. I guess you never really know how problems can start. It's good that you got the help you needed. And the roast duck theory is funny, but at least now you know it wasn't your dinner. Just shows how important it is to take care of your health. It's kinda messed with my head for the longest time that humans have this useless organ part that might kill them randomly at any time in a ridiculously painful and drawn-out way. Like even a brain aneurysm seems humane compared to dying from your appendix bursting and sepsis. Yeah, it's strange to think about. One of my friends had his appendix removed after it almost burst. He said the pain was unimaginable. It really made us think about how fragile our bodies are with these random parts that can cause so much trouble. You just go about your day, and then something like that can hit you out of nowhere. It's a reminder to appreciate health while you have it. I don't know if you live in the US, but it's really crazy watching here how cheap it is to produce versus how many people are actually dying just from not being able to actually get insulin due to the price it is here. My mother-in-law has told me that she wasn't on Medicare. Her insulin would cost her something like $1,500 a month, and that is an insane number for something that costs so little to produce. It's tough to hear about health issues tied to costs like that. It's hard to believe that something essential can have such a price tag. It really highlights some major flaws in the system. Makes you think about how a lot of people struggle just to stay healthy. I guess that's the reality for many. Everyone should have access to what they need without going broke. My wife, my sister, and my brother's wife, literally all the women in my siblings and my life, all would have died without modern healthcare. They all had 2 kids each, so that was 6 different complications. Childbirth is rough. As a man, I just want to say, I'm sorry for everything. It's good to recognize what women go through. Childbirth is tough, and not everyone makes it through easily. It's a real eye-opener when you see the risks involved. Your support matters a lot. Just acknowledging their struggles shows you care. It's kind of a reminder for everyone to appreciate the healthcare system and the people who put their lives on the line for us. I was gonna say childbirth. My first child was breech and they tried to turn her, but that didn't work, so I had a C-section and then I developed a staph infection and I was hospitalized for 2 weeks, so yeah, I wouldn't have survived the childbirth or the infection if modern medicine didn't exist. That sounds really intense. It must have been a lot to go through, especially with all the complications. It's good to hear that modern medicine was able to help you make it through such a tough time. Childbirth can be unpredictable, and your experience highlights how important it is to have medical support when things don't go as planned. Glad you're okay now. I don't know about you, but at least in Maine where I live, asthma is such a throwaway disease to some. Oh, you have cold weather-induced asthma? Go grab all those shopping carts and wind yourself while doing it. Oh, also, don't cover your face. I don't know what the actual rate is, but I know people die from asthma more than they should. I get it. Asthma can be overlooked, especially in colder places. I had a friend who dealt with it all the time. People never really understood what she went through. It wasn't just a simple cough, it affected her daily life. Sometimes, it felt like others brushed it off like it was no big deal. It's a reminder that everyone has their struggles, even if they're not visible. I can see things clearly at about 1 meter. At 3 meters, things get difficult. At 10 meters, I might as well be staring at a Jackson Pollock. If the zombie apocalypse happens, I'm gonna head to the nearest LensCrafters and raid the shit out of it. That's a practical plan. Vision issues can really change your perspective, literally. I get the idea of wanting to stock up on supplies when the world goes sideways. Just imagine if you could grab all those glasses before things go wild. You'd be set, at least for your sight. Hopefully, there's not too much competition for the best frames. Please consider subscribing if you enjoyed. Love.